This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. One of the storylines of the offseason that I am really interested to see how much it actually translates to mattering during the regular season is this quarterback competition. Because right now it feels like it's going to be super important for the season, right? We're talking about the starting quarterback of the football team, but then you rewind back to last year and you remember the chaotic quarterback competition they had, right? It was a four-way competition, but really a two-way competition between Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco, with some reps for Dillon Gabriel, with Shador largely not being seriously considered to start week one, which was its own controversy. And then by the time we get to like week 5, Kenny Pickett's off the roster, Joe Flacco's off the roster, and we're playing Dillon Gabriel anyways, right? There's always a chance when you have a quarterback competition that by the time you get to October, you sit back and you laugh about how much you thought about this quarterback competition, when in reality, you were destined to rotate quarterbacks pretty often throughout the season. I have my fears that that's more or less the situation Cleveland is going to be in. But hey, to be fair to the people in this competition, you know, when I talk to people who have been at camp, when I talk to guys like Lance Rislin, who, shout out to him, sent me a whole like recap of what he feels like he's seen. He seems to feel much better about the quarterback room than I do based off of the last time we saw these guys play football, right? So the hope here is that through this competition, whoever wins it, I think is irrelevant, right? But the hope here is that through this competition, we see somebody give us hope that we can get somewhere close to average quarterback play. Now, we're not going to get to average more than likely, right? I make this point all the time when people are like, all we got to do is get to average quarterback play. I've been a Browns fan my entire life. I'm 31 years old, and I've maybe seen 2 or 3 seasons of average quarterback play or better in Cleveland. So, like, the idea that we're just going to magically walk into average quarterback play, that's very difficult, right? The Browns have been searching for a long time to get consistent average quarterback play. It has not happened throughout the existence of this franchise. But what they can hope for is, I think, somewhere between the 25th and 20th ranked quarterback play. If we could just be that, below average, but right there where we're not awful, right? I think the proper term for it is mediocre, right? You're not terrible. You're not average. You're mediocre. If we can get mediocre quarterback play, which I think is much more within our grasp, I think it'll be interesting to see what this team can produce. But Jeremy Fowler was on I think the Daily Grossy for ESPN Cleveland. Him and Chops were talking about this quarterback competition, and I want to listen in to see what his perspective is, because again, Jeremy Fowler is somebody from my personal experience I have seen be around a lot of what the Browns are doing whenever I am there in Berea, right? I always see Jeremy Fowler there during camp. During the Senior Bowl, I always see Jeremy Fowler talking to Andrew Berry. I know of the national reporters, outside of like Daniel Ofoise, who obviously very connected to Cleveland. He covers the Browns beat for ESPN. But Jeremy Fowler is the national kind of reporter that does anchor himself a little bit to Cleveland. So it's interesting to hear what he has to say, because he's a bit more connected to most other people when it comes to the Browns when we're talking about a national perspective. So let's jump in and listen to what Jeremy Fowler has to say. But first, I got to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules, just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jimmy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game is going to be better with it. Chase Brown, under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews, more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. Hey, what's up, everybody? All right, so we're back. Jeremy Fowler talking on ESPN Cleveland with Chops on the Daily Grossy about the Browns quarterback situation. Let's hear what he has to say.
Yes, it is. I think they're always looking at that stuff. I would look at like a extra pass rusher, even if it's just like a depth guy. And then they could probably use a fourth cornerback, So think rotational pieces, but you can do that closer to roster cutdowns in late August if you want. You can do that closer to like training camp. There are windows for that where right now I'd say it's more of a quiet time. But there's always room for a small trade here or there. So I could see the Browns defensively looking for some more depth in those two areas at some point.
I wonder where the surplus is going to be on this roster now, or where they're going to feel comfortable with the surplus. Because for a few years, the surplus has been on the defensive line. And you felt comfortable trading surplus on the defensive line because you had Myles Garrett, right? And I know some people are like, oh, why you have to bring up – you traded the best player on your team, one of the best players in franchise history, the best player I've ever seen play in a Browns uniform. It's going to matter the season after. Let's be adults about this, right? There's no way to talk about the Cleveland Browns in 2026 without talking about the absence of Myles, right? But in previous years, that is how the Browns would kind of fill in the gaps. It's like, oh, okay, we have a surplus on the defensive line, and we're okay selling off surplus because we have the greatest defensive player in football on that defensive line. So we can ship off a defensive tackle for a corner. We can ship off a defensive lineman for an offensive lineman, right? Now it's a little bit different where that surplus is a lot more valuable to you now that you have no Myles Garrett, right? You're trying to replace Myles in the aggregate. You're trying to moneyball it, right? Part of what you need if you're going to do that is bodies, right? So what used to be a surplus and spareable on the defensive line, I don't really think is spareable anymore. I don't think you want to ship off surplus on the defensive line, which is where the Browns are most talent rich. If you look at other areas where you would assume the Browns would be very strong at, it's on the defensive side of the ball. They're not at a surplus at all at corner. They actually need more in at corner. They're not at a surplus at linebacker right now. You can make the argument that they need more at linebacker. Maybe a little bit of a surplus at safety, right? And I wonder if that's where they're comfortable shipping guys off. But Mike Rutenberg coming in, he is a safeties coach I think it was a safeties coach or a secondary coach and a pass game coordinator before he became the defensive coordinator. So you would assume that he wants a lot of extra safeties on this team. But also it goes into like, you're so thin at corner. Are you really comfortable sparing surplus at safety? Because the reason the surplus is important, if I haven't explained it thoroughly, you use your surplus at certain positions at the end of camp to try to get better players before they hit the waiver wire, before the 53 cut down, right? Like you guys that you really want to pick up from other squads that are probably going to get cut that you think can be your fourth corner, you think can be your third linebacker or something like that, right? The Browns could ship off that surplus before. I don't know if they have surplus anymore to ship off. If we look at the offensive side of the ball, maybe they might have a little bit of offensive line surplus because they did go really hard at signing a bunch of offensive linemen. They might end up with more than they can roster there. So maybe the offensive line is an area where there's surplus for them. But I think that's going to be something to watch during training camp is like, hey, where does the Browns roster when it comes to camp cut guys? Where does it feel like we're going to, at what position groups does it feel like we got to cut a good player because that's where your surplus is going to come from. And that's where Andrew Berry's ability to maneuver and get valuable pieces on that final 53 roster at the back end of it is really going to be affected there. So interested to see how they handle that.
Go sign another veteran. They like that they're rolling with Watson.
Once we get into training camp,
I am hearing that the Browns are pleased with where they're at with both players. They're glad they didn't go sign another veteran. They like that they're rolling with Watson and Shador. They feel like both got better. They feel like Shador has played well enough to make this interesting, close the gap a little bit. I don't know how much he closed the gap, but from what I've been told, he did well enough to where it's a play right now. Both guys are going to have to earn it. I think maybe 2 months ago it would have been clearly Deshaun. I still think Deshaun is well positioned, and it was noted to me that he moved really well this OTA's minicamp from an athletic standpoint. Like, that was a concern because of the Achilles tears, and he's looked pretty good. He looks like an athlete out there, so that's a positive. But Shador's decision making looks like it's improved, and he's got a presence about him, which has been told to me by multiple people. Like, there's something there. They got to figure out what that is exactly. And I do caution that OTA's minicamp, no pads, mostly 7-on-7 stuff. Like, a lot's going to have to happen. 90% of the quarterback story has not been told yet as far as who's going to start, because you need those 5-6 days in a row like you get in training camp, the pads. Yeah. I don't know offhand if they have joint practices, but the preseason game action, I expect both quarterbacks to get some preseason game action before they make a call. And I think it's just going to be structured like it was in the spring, where you do first and second team and guys get different runs at different times and you make the best of it.
So interesting. That sounds exactly like where the decision point was last year. Yeah. So that to me sounds like what it should be as far as a quarterback competition goes. If you ask me, it's probably going to be a decision that gets made after the second preseason game, after joint practices, right? Like, that feels like the right time to announce a starting quarterback. You still get like 2 to 3 weeks to prepare that guy for week 1, which should be enough time. That timeline makes sense. Honestly, I was concerned that they were going to try to rush it, name a quarterback early. With both of these guys, right, when we're talking about two players who need to show improvement from where they were last year or the last time we saw them. When it comes to like naming one of those guys starters, I think it's always smart to see them in live contact before you make that. See them against another team before you make that decision. Now, I think the best case scenario for Cleveland is that Shador just outright wins this job by the end of camp. That to me is the best case scenario on like multiple levels. One, it's a best case scenario because of Shador's age, his contract, and his expense over the next couple of years. He's still on a rookie deal until 2026 will be his second year. So he has until the end of 2028 where he's on that rookie deal. He's also cost controlled and super cheap. I don't even think he clears $1 million on the cap at any point. And I think even then, like that 4th or 5th year, well, no, not the 5th year, but they have like control options on that contract. They can do tenders and stuff like that. So long term, right, if Shador plays well this year, and let's say Shador plays well, you're not in range for a quarterback, well, you don't have to rush it. You could just see what happens with Shador as you go forward. If Deshaun is the quarterback that emerges out of this situation, it gets a little bit more tricky because he's 30, be 31 by the end of the season. There's really a lot of baggage there with Deshaun, but I assume if he plays well, some of that baggage will go away. But it's really the age, and it's like, oh, you have to pay him now. And like, you just structured the whole team to get him off the books, then having to turn around and give him, even if it's just $15-20 million, it just feels like a lot of maneuvering that you would have to do. It's definitely more messy if Deshaun like ends up being the guy who takes the job. Also, me personally, I just think if Deshaun wins the job, it just tells you what kind of year we're going to have at quarterback, because I just don't believe Deshaun's going to play well this year. I could be wrong on that, and if Deshaun does win the job, I hope I am wrong on that. I want the Browns to have the best quarterback play possible, and if Deshaun can provide that, sure. But me personally, I feel like it's not a great sign if Shedeur can't beat out Deshaun, because I don't really think highly of the level of football I've seen Deshaun Watson play in a Cleveland Browns uniform. And I don't think that's a crazy opinion to have in 2026. So, yeah, I think the best case for the Browns is that Shedeur does win this job, is that Shedeur does continue to show development. Really, the area that I think is going to be most important for Shedeur is just game management, right? He can make some spectacular throws. He can make some big-time throws. He just needs to be able to manage the game better, right? And I've talked about that before in one of my breakdowns where I'm going through some of the decisions Shedeur made at the end of these games last year and breaking down why it is that these are bad decisions to make in these situations, and they're not like conducive to winning. If he can control that and get into a better place with that, which is manageable, then there's something there to where you don't have to be miserable at quarterback. And remember, the goal for this season is that we just don't want to be miserable at quarterback going into 2027, whether that's because we see a draft pick that can save us, whether that's because we think Shedeur can save us, or whether that's because we see a trade or free agent option available to us. We need to not be miserable about quarterback going into 2027 because of the play that was on the field.
Yeah, and then it was interesting at the end of minicamp, the Browns quarterback coach mentioned, when we get to training camp, the pads comes on, it's going to decide itself pretty quickly. That's like those were his words. So is that kind of like the timing of training camp? Do you think that like they want like last year, Stefanski named Flacco the starter at the very end of training camp, and it kind of went on. Pickett had the injury and all that. Do you think that they still kind of want to do this earlier in training camp? I know they do have the joint practice with the Bills. I think that's their second preseason game.
It's a new head coach, so there's not a lot of precedent. I get the sense that Todd Monken wants to see a lot more. Like he wants to ride this out a little bit and maybe be uncomfortable with the noise for an extra week if he has to. I don't think it's like, hey, there's the clear favorite that we'll name in 2 weeks, where Flacco is like, is kind of expected because of his stature. Yeah. It's some really young players that were mid to late round picks. You didn't have a surefire first rounder pushing him in that way. So Flacco kind of had the inside track going into it all, where certainly I think Deshaun Watson is still well positioned. I want to be clear about that, but it's a race. It really is. And, like I was at Vikings mini camp. I stopped over there next week to give you an example of another team, and talking to people there, they're like, hey, we're not close to a decision. Like, cause you're just really trying to see guys with their footwork and their ball placement. But it has no bearing on what they can do in a real football situation. 11-man work, bodies flying around. You know what I mean? Because you just can't simulate that in the spring. You can in camp.
Do you think?
Yeah, that's why I thought, like, again, we got multiple reports this year for some reason about, like, people claimed victory about this quarterback job like 2 weeks into it. And I always thought that was ridiculous because, like, the idea, again, of the Browns declaring a quarterback without watching that quarterback play football in the situation they are in is ridiculous, right? And right now the Browns haven't played any football. Like they've practiced some 7-on-7s, but like 7-on-7s is not how you line them up on Sundays. Unpadded practice is not how you line it up on Sunday. They haven't come close to playing any football. But like, when Mary Kay wrote the article basically anointing Deshaun Watson to start, I was like, that's ridiculous. I don't care what you're hearing. There's no way that that's the case when neither of these guys have played football. Like that no coach is going to make that decision there. So, just keep that in mind whenever you're going to hear throughout the next 6 weeks before camp. Oh, it's this way. Oh, it's going to be this way. They don't know who the starter is going to be. Like the coaching staff does not know who the starter is going to be. So none of these reports are as definitive as they try to make themselves sound, because the source can't be definitive. Todd Monken doesn't know who the starting quarterback is going to be right now. You know what I mean? He's waiting to see what they look like in pads. He's waiting to see what they look like against live competition. He's waiting to see what they look like probably during joint practices, right? Unless there is a disaster, like unless Shedeur is like a straight up disaster, the first 2 weeks of training camp, we're probably seeing this thing go till joint practice. And that's actually a good thing. We shouldn't be upset about it. If you wanted a fair competition means that you have to go over hurdles that are fair, right? If this competition, no matter how they would have split the reps, right? If they ended the competition in June, that would have been incredibly unfair to Shedeur. Because, of course, Deshaun, in a more academic setting, in a situation where there's less of an emphasis on what he could do in actual 11-on-11 situations, and it's more simulated football than actual football. Of course, Deshaun Watson, a 10-year veteran, is going to look much better than Shedeur Sanders and win the job in that segment if that's where the competition was going to go. But that wouldn't have been fair to Shedeur, right? Because got to let him actually play football before you decide it. Letting it go till joint practices is actually fair, to both sides of this. It gives Deshaun a chance to show that his athleticism hasn't been hurt and that he's actually back and the live content, like all that stuff he wants to prove. He could prove it he could prove it to a point during the preseason. And then for Shedeur, there's stuff that he wants to prove that you can't really prove in practice. You can only really prove during live games. So it's only fair that it goes that length. And honestly, I don't think it's that much of a disadvantage for the Browns, given that whatever their game plan is going to be for the first 3 weeks of the season, probably not going to be, let's put it all on the quarterback's shoulders. Probably not going to be the game plan all season.
There's just such a long way to go with these battles.
Do you think part of that is Deshaun is coming off the 2 Achilles and they want to see him in pads, like just to see that he could physically do stuff like that?
Sure. Yeah, he's got a really checkpoints he has to hit. And one was like, how are you moving around in and out of the pocket? Do you look like an athlete? And he did. He passed that test, I was told. Like they're pleased with where he is moving around, moving well off the Achilles. So that's a good stop, a good checkpoint for him to work through. And yeah, the next step is like when you're navigating a pocket and bodies are flying around a little bit, even though quarterbacks aren't really going to get hit. Yeah. But you need to simulate that sort of, pressure and pulling and tugging around you, and guys getting kind of calloused to contact, in some way or form. Yeah. And receivers getting pushed at the line, getting pressed. So you need all that, and so that's the next step for him, I would say.
Jeremy, you always talk about how the Browns are a value-based organization. I think you were one of the first guys who mentioned last year, hey, they could move one of these guys, and we saw Kenny Pickett end up getting moved. Joe Flacco actually ended up getting moved too later. But when thinking about the Browns through that scope, they have 4 quarterbacks on the roster right now. We don't see a lot of Taylon Green. Like, we track all the reps. I think he got 1 team rep in OTA, so he's just kind of there. It was mostly Shedeur and Deshaun, and then Dylan a little bit. How do you think this whole QB room will kind of unfold as we go through training camp?
Yeah, well, I would say, that puts Dylan Gabriel in an interesting spot, right? Because he hasn't been listed in this 2-man race. And just thinking about the dominoes that could fall, a lot can happen because you got Gabriel as this third option. Mm-hmm. Maybe he has value somewhere. Maybe somebody makes a call to Cleveland and it's intriguing enough to think about. He can run that West Coast system well. He's good with like the ball fakes and the bootlegs, throwing on the run, play action. Like he can do all that. Mm-hmm. He's kind of a guy. I asked an NFL coach about him the other day, actually, and it was more like, hey, he's going to play a long time in the league, probably. Like he's not going to fizzle out, even though he's small in stature. Like he'll be a backup for a long time somewhere, a 2 or 3. He probably isn't tracking right now for the profile of a starter, but maybe that has value somewhere. It's different because Kenny Pickett, it was a first-round pick who had done it for a couple years, even though it didn't work out. But he was a surefire backup, so the Raiders gave value for that. I still don't know if Gabriel, even though if he might play a long time in the league, I don't know if he has that value yet. We'll see. But then you have the Shedeur Sanders factor, where if he doesn't get the job, is he the right backup for your team? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe he is, and he's a young player, so he's got some time. Mm-hmm. I still go back to he's a 5th-round pick. It's hard to expect to to be the starter every year when you're a 5th-round pick. You got to earn it, right? Like, you're not promised anything unless you're really a first rounder. So, maybe he's kind of matured to the point where, win or lose, he's going to be a good Brown and happy about that. So far he's been good behind the scenes in the locker room and working and all that stuff. So I think if Shedeur were to lose the job, it'll be interesting to see how he handles that. And if the Browns feel like maybe there's some tension there, maybe they do try to facilitate a trade. But I don't think it's
okay. So let's talk about that scenario, because I've had people in comment sections bring up this specific scenario, right? Oh, could the Browns trade Shedeur? I think it's unlikely, because one, like, this whole question of if Shedeur can be the backup, right? It's not really a question about Shedeur. Because, like, Shedeur was the emergency quarterback for most of the season last year. He handled that fine, right? He was like the 4th quarterback on the depth chart at certain points last year. And, mentally and maturation-wise, like, he handled all that fine. You know what I mean? According to every source involved with last season, it doesn't seem like he's not that kind of issue. The only reason that this even gets thought of as an issue for Shedeur is because Shedeur is one of the few players who could be a backup, but he's still going to be talked about by major sports figures, right? The conversation about Shedeur is still going to be on ESPN. It's still going to be on First Take. It's still going to be talked about on various podcasts, right? Like, the conversation about Shedeur won't die just because he's not the starter. And that's really what people are talking about. But that's not a question about if Shedeur can actually be the backup quarterback. It's what is your stomach for the media appetite for Shedeur. If you have a large stomach for that, then this isn't going to be a single thing that bothers you. If you don't have the stomach for that, then maybe this is where you could go and trade somebody. I think from what we've seen of Todd, he has the stomach for it. So I don't see him feeling the need to trade Shedeur. And honestly, if you're the Browns, and you're going to start Deshaun Watson, haven't you learned enough from trusting Deshaun Watson over the last 5 years that you probably want an insurance policy just in case, right? And then also, Deshaun's not at the place at all in this organization where he could be like, oh, well, I want Shedeur gone because I'm not comfortable. Like, that can't happen either. So, all the scenarios where the Browns would, trade Shedeur, they just don't make much sense to me unless Shedeur is garbage to them. Unless Shedeur plays really bad, practices bad, has horrible practice habits, and we don't know about it, right? Then maybe it makes sense to trade him because they're like, oh, well, he's not going to be an asset to our team. But if Shedeur is improving like they say that he is, if Shedeur is working hard, if Shedeur handled being the backup as well as it seems like he did last year, then I see no reason for that to happen. Because again, even if you start Deshaun Watson, are we just going to trust that Deshaun's going to be good for 17 games? Or maybe the better question is to ask, are we going to trust that Deshaun Watson is going to be healthy for 17 games? He's only played 19 in Cleveland. So I would, if you're Cleveland, I would definitely want an insurance policy on him. And that's what Shedeur would serve to be. So I don't think it's a situation where it's like, oh, Shedeur doesn't win, but we can't have Shedeur as the backup, so we're going to trade him and make Dillon the backup. I think Shedeur will be fine as the backup. He's proven this. I don't know why we're questioning this. You know what I mean? Shedeur is everything that people worry about with Shedeur is just about the media attention that he gets. It's not about anything that Shedeur does, right? He's done nothing for me to deem him as some kind of character risk on this team. He's honestly done things that make me think that he's a character positive on this team. You know what I mean? Do his fans tend to overrate him and get kind of annoying on the internet? Absolutely. We all know this is true. Even the people within the Sanders fandom know that they can be annoying, right? But that's not a good reason to make a football decision, right? And that's the only reason you wouldn't want Shedeur as a backup. So I don't see them doing that. But that's my thoughts on this interview. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you want to check out the whole thing, go to ESPN Cleveland's YouTube channel and check it out. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.